All right, so it looks like we've got an update on this Lil Durk situation. Yesterday, we went over a motion that he filed to essentially have the superseding indictment against him thrown out. The argument in that was basically the prosecutors presented to the grand jury evidence in the form of a song that he recorded with Babyface Ray. And the version of this song that prosecutors showed the grand jury in order to secure the superseding indictment was a version that had Quando Rondo's vocals edited on top of it, where he was screaming out no after Lil Pab was shot. The argument in that motion was pretty much they showed the grand jury a fan edit, tried to say that that was proof that Lil Durk committed this crime and used that to get the indictment, right? That's what they argued. Along with that, they also filed a motion to reconsider bond. Lil Durk has been denied bond multiple times, and it's pretty much been because the government looks at him as a flight risk. If you remember, when he was arrested, they caught him pretty much trying to flee the country. He had multiple flights booked going to multiple different places in an effort to try to throw the feds off of his trail. And so because of that, they have not wanted to release Durk, even though he has offered them a multi-million-dollar bond package. And the transcripts for what went down have been released. Okay, so we got this right here. This is basically just a cover page of it. And remember, this is the transcript that we're going over. So this is everything that was said in the courtroom. And basically, you got a lot of people from the United States Attorney's Office representing the government, and you got the Finling Law Firm, the law office of Christy O'Connor, and a few other people representing Lil Durk. And the first people to get to speak in this obviously is the government. And of course, they are going to be arguing for Lil Durk to remain detained. They say that the government submits that both flight and danger are ongoing and will believe that Lil Durk should be detained because of both of those reasons. Basically, they think he'll try to run, and on top of that, they believe he's a danger to the community. They say the government's positions are set forth in his briefing. I think this room is a good barometer for a good bellwether for the fact that the defendant is a powerful and influential man. He has significant resources as evidenced by the bond that was proposed in the bond package that he submitted. But this case is about how he's used that power, how he's used that influence, and how he's used those resources and used those things to promote and perpetuate violence with deadly consequences. Lil Durk is alleged to have committed this murder with other conspirators, hitmen who Lil Durk orchestrated and caused to fly from Chicago and conduct a brazen, calculated murder in broad daylight outside of one of the busiest malls in the country. At about 4 p.m. in the afternoon, with cars driving by, machine gun fire rained down, attempting to murder a rival, ultimately striking somebody who was in the vehicle with that person. And by nothing short of a miracle, nobody else was killed during that encounter. The brazenness of the conduct, the allegations, the other information before the court warrant detention in this matter. There are no conditions or combination of conditions that can ensure defendant's appearance or mitigate the risk of continued danger to both the community and witnesses in this case. The judge said, you referenced pretrial services recommendations with regard to the risk of flight. Could you just give a bit more background to the reason why the government contends that detention is warranted here based on a serious flight risk? And the government said, so I think let's go back in time to some of what happened here. So following the murder, Lil Durk's co-conspirators were charged in an indictment, and on the date that that indictment was unsealed, the FBI conducted multiple search warrants, made arrests for those co-defendants, and Lil Durk was not yet indicted or charged in the case. But on that same day, Lil Durk booked, and the FBI received notice that Lil Durk was booked on 3 international flights. Multiple of those flights were destined for Dubai, but at least one of those flights was destined to a non-extradition country. Lil Durk was ultimately arrested pursuant to a complaint at the airport, essentially prepared to board that flight with luggage and everything else. So they're talking about the flight that was going to the non-extradition country. That's where they found him. So the government submits that the evidence is Lil Durk's intent. As the walls were closing in, he attempted to flee. He attempted to board an international flight, and now he's fully aware of the FBI's ability to track flight records and track boarding records. And so the government believes that he's a sophisticated, smart man, to the extent that when he wants to flee, he's going to be able to do it by not just booking a flight and simply crossing the border just south of us. That's a couple-hour car ride. The judge said, all right, thank you. And he said, I will hear from the defense now. I've received a binder from from the defense with 4 tabs with various documents, which was delivered to the court today. And I have reviewed all the materials and I'll hear the argument from the defense. So let's get into what Lil Durk's defense attorney said. He says, Judge, in terms of Lil Durk's background, he grew up and was born and raised in Chicago on the South Side in the Inglewood neighborhood. It is one of the most economically depressed neighborhoods in Chicago. He was raised by a woman that is here in court today, LaShonda Woodard, who's in the first row here in the court in the white shirt. That's his mom, and she raised him along with his grandmother in the South Side of Chicago. He was raised there in a home full of love and surrounded by 5 siblings. He had an older brother by the name of Dante, and he also has a father by the name of Dante Banks, who had at a very early age in Lil Durk's life got incarcerated when Lil Durk was only 7 months old. Lil Durk's dad was incarcerated up until a period of time a few years ago. Since Lil Durk's father has come home, he's a man of faith now. He is somebody that participates in his faith community and his family, and he's dedicated to his community in Chicago. He's worked with Chicago CRED, which is a gun violence reduction program that was started by former U.S. Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan in Chicago. And essentially, Judge, growing up in Inglewood, Lil Durk was no doubt surrounded by violence, gangs, drugs, and music was his way out of that community. His mom talks about him writing at an early age, and it was his way to express himself about what he was feeling at the time and what he was going through in Chicago. And in around the time that he was 17, 18 years old, he started to make a name for himself. In 2012, him and his older brother started a group called Only the Family, which was fittingly named Only the Family because it was him and his older brother. And in 2013, Def Jam Records signed Lil Durk to a multi-record deal that ultimately allowed Lil Durk to move out of Chicago, move his family out of Chicago, and he moved to Atlanta in Fulton County, where he lived for a couple years. Once he was in Fulton County, and Judge, you do have a pretrial report that has a criminal case from Fulton County. We've shared the documents from that case. It was a dismissed case, but ultimately we've shared documents both with the government and pretrial services that show that after Lil Durk was arrested in that case, he was arrested with a couple of co-defendants, but he stayed in strict compliance with Judge Farmer's orders in that case. He was initially set 2 conditions that included GPS monitor, curfew, reporting no contact with witnesses, and because of his strict compliance, Judge Farmer over time eased the conditions. He allowed Lil Durk to continue to engage in gainful employment as a musician and a recording artist. He traveled with the consent and permission of the court, both in this country and also internationally. And since that time, he's moved out of Chicago. He's traveled extensively for business purposes, Judge. And the judge said, let me just ask a question with regard to you mentioning that he was being supervised by the court or under supervision of the court in Fulton County. Was he under the supervision order at the time of the conduct that is alleged in this case? Durk's attorney said, we had just looked at the documents. I think ultimately the declination prosecution happened in October of 2022. The allegation that is at the heart of this case is from about 2 months earlier, August 19th, 2022. I think he was still under supervision at that time, Judge. Oof, that's not a good look. They was trying to use that case from Fulton County like, look, he complied completely with everything that the court wanted him to do, and there was no problems when he was released. And the judge is like, hold on, was he still under supervision when this murder took place? And he was, bro. Oh my God. Durk's attorney said, Judge, obviously we contest his involvement in what he is charged with in this case, but Judge, I think at the time it was the district attorney in Fulton County was in the process of essentially dismissing that case. But in that case, there was never a suggestion of any type of violation. And because he was doing so well with pretrial services, Judge Farmer there allowed him to travel, continue to support his family, and continue to engage in gainful employment. Also, Judge, in terms of his good works and his acts of service, he founded a foundation, a 501c3, which is a nonprofit organization called Neighborhood Heroes. The CEO of that foundation is here in court, Kevin Freeman, who's the gentleman raising his hand in the front row there. And some of the things that they did in Chicago and elsewhere was like in April of 2020 when they helped bring hot meals to the frontline workers in Chicago at Mercy Hospital. They helped feed thousands of families for Thanksgiving in 2021 and 2022. And they have encouraged education in communities in Chicago, Atlanta, and elsewhere for young people to be able to go to colleges and historic HBCUs and Howard University. They have allowed young people to be able to live their life to its full potential, like Lil Durk has done. Judge, his story, it's one of maturity. It's one one of growth. It's one of trying to do better for him and his family. And Judge, that's all I have to say in terms of the personal aspect. I think Mr. Findling will follow up with some professional details. Mr. Findling gets up. He says, I do want to add some context. I know you asked Mr. Brayman, the previous attorney, about Fulton County. My law partner, Marissa Goldberg, and our offices are in Fulton County. That's where my career is. One of my daughters is a public defender there. My son was a public defender, so I know the county pretty well. And I just, for a second, want to give some context. That case that the government there in Fulton County, the district attorney's office, declined to prosecute is a case that takes RICO cases and gang cases very seriously. They seldom decline to prosecute a case. You may know from the news that they pursued a RICO case and continue to stand by a RICO case against a former president of the United States of America. They made national news with a 2-year trial in the YSL RICO case. They tried the YFN RICO case. All of these are gang-related cases where the attorneys, I can assure you, because we've been part of some of them, have begged for declining prosecutions. So it's quite a statement that she declined to prosecute this case. All right, so he's just adding context for the judge because they're the ones that brought up that case, and the judge punched a pretty big hole through it. He again hits on the fact that Lil Durk's father was in jail while he was growing up, how his life was hard, and he turned that into music. And then he said, so I want to, for the purpose of this hearing, talk about 2 important issues. The government, of course, took the position that they disagreed, and I'll get back to that in a second, with the pretrial services report. And respectfully, we disagree with the report because it finds a reason to detain our client. We think, as the package reflects, that he should be released with strict conditions on bail. But first, I want to talk about the appearance of Lil Durk as required, because nevertheless, the government contested that something for the court to take into consideration. Again, respectfully to counsel for the government, I don't think that if he's released, there's nothing that we found that indicates that there's some concern that he's 2 hours from the Mexican border. I have not seen anything about that has to do with this case. However, it is true that Lil Durk, as so many people in his situation do, travels internationally. He is an international recording artist, and I would tell you that he does, and he has flown to Dubai absolutely over the last 2 years, and there's reasons for that. One, of course, in 2019, after waiting to have a relationship and to be with his dad, other than in jail visits, his dad was out. His dad turned to the Muslim faith. He in turn embraced the Muslim faith with his dad, and of course, to many, the heartland of that faith is in the UAE, and he spent time there. But most importantly, that is a big part of his profession, having that relationship in the UAE. I will tell your honor that we come from Atlanta, a place that some people call the hip hop Hollywood. It's impossible to get a flight because the music industry goes back and forth there. There is a big place for performances. Lil Durk has performed there, and if you haven't made it in his musical genre, that is an incredible place to make an income. I don't know what he's going on about Atlanta for, so it's not unusual, he says. And so the record is really clear that he has flown to the UAE. We don't deny that. We don't debate that. We don't fight that. In fact, he was just 4 days before he was taken into custody. He came back from being in London. This is referred to in some of the documents that you received. He was in the UK, and I want to tell the court why he was in the UK. He was there because Lil Durk, who is in our position not a threat to the community, is not a threat to leave the jurisdiction, but respect the rules and the direction of the court, was in the UK as a guest of the NFL Chicago Bears. He actually was in a suite watching the game with the mayor of London and the mayor of Chicago. He was the guest of the Chicago Bears. He actually spent time with Roger Goodell, the commissioner. So these are the kind of people that have embraced him because of his community outreach. I don't see them people in court, but anyways, he said he comes back from the trip to the UK, and that's when he was, as your honor can see from some of the documents, that's when a search warrant for his phone was issued. Now, if he is so concerned about fleeing the jurisdiction of anywhere in the United States and heading for the Mexico border or heading for somewhere else when his phone is taken from him, if he's so concerned about what's going to be on that phone, then that's the time to leave. Man, I don't know what this attorney is going on about. But what does happen is exactly 4 days after his phone is taken by the government, by the FBI, so they can look into it, he performs in front of a 19,000 plus people crowd in an arena, the United Arena in Chicago, for a birthday celebration for himself. It was sold out. He's in front of 19,000 people performing. So there was no fear on his part that they had his phone, and 4 days later, he's going to take off, but rather he does this performance. Honestly, this attorney sucks. He should fire this guy immediately. This is a terrible argument. What the fuck does any of that have to do with anything, bro? Anyways, he continues. He says, and so I want to address for a second, the government told you that there was concern that he booked these flights. I will tell you that I agree with the government. What? There were reservations that were made because he was going to the UAE, and we've looked at the documents, and I want to share something with the court. I know the government wasn't specific, but looking at the original complaint and some of the documents, there was this belief that there was a reservation to Dubai, then there was a reservation to Switzerland, and ultimately a private flight. I will tell you, we've been trying to gather the private flight information, and it appears over approximately a 13-month period in time, he took as many as 24 private flights. Good decision or bad decision economically, that is part of the music industry. They keep the private flight companies, the charter flights, very, very busy. But specifically, I'll share, and I'm going to give a copy because I want to share this with the government so that we can correct their misunderstanding. This is an e-ticket. He gives the ticket to the judge. He said, and I think there was some confusion, and I know that our colleagues from the government are relying on agents to get them this information. So I don't think in any way this is a fault, deliberate, but you'll see that this was the ultimate destination was actually the UAE. So there was a flight from Florida to Newark to Paris, to Zurich, and then the third part of the ticket is Zurich to Dubai. For some reason, whoever researched this case for the government took the position that it ended in Zurich. Had that person or persons done the additional research and just flipped over to the next page when they did their investigation, they would have seen that this was ultimately going to the UAE as well. Now here's what happens is that Lil Durk has gotten to the point in his life, maybe he grew up under the most dire of socioeconomic circumstances, but you'll see he was only able to get a reservation for this 24-hour track on economy, and he made a decision to ultimately book a private plane. And that's, as the government said, when he was taken into custody, unequivocally, he was taking that private plane, which was going to change in Europe, I believe, in Italy, but ultimately that he was going to the UAE as well. But there was no flight to Switzerland. And we have talked with everybody involved in his world, as it's not unusual for business folks to make reservations, then pick the flight that works best for them. He opted to, although he never got on it, to not sit in wherever it was in economy for the 24-hour track, but to fly private. We've done our own due diligence and been able to determine again in about a 12 or 13 month period, as many as 24 private flights were taken. So this is not something inconsistent with his lifestyle. The government's position is that Lil Durk, who's internationally known, internationally recognized with his presence on everything on the internet, hard copy and magazines, TV, is going to go somewhere on the run, go on the lam. And when he does that, not only give up his career that he's built to escape poverty with so that he can provide for his family. You can see in the bail package, he's bought his mom a beautiful home that he's willing to put as part of the package to secure his appearance. But he's going to leave his wife. He's going to leave his 2 children he has with her and his 6 other children. He's going to leave 8 children that I know pretrial services dotted their I's and crossed their T's to know that he has always financially stepped up and assumed the responsibility of taking care of his children. He's going to leave his mom, who he gave his life to. He's going to leave his dad, who he waited 26 years so he can build a relationship with him, a relationship that was interrupted because in 2019, his dad gets out and then we all get slowed down for 2 years from the pandemic. So he's finally first embracing this loving relationship with his dad, enjoying being part of the same faith together. But he's going to leave his dad. He's going to leave his wife. He's going to leave all of his kids. He's going to leave his career. He's going to leave the amazing community work that he's done, not just locally throughout the United States. I mean, this is, as we found, this isn't a hip hop performer that gives away backpacks on Labor Day weekend and a few turkeys. This is an incredible amount of community service that he has done on a regular basis. He's going to give all that up. And I just think that there's nothing to indicate that, particularly with this new theory that he's going to Mexico, because I can't respond to that because I don't know anything about that. The other issue we have to address is whether or not he is a threat to the safety of any person and the community. This is an important issue and when we deal with him, let me just say this, Your Honor, based on what the government said, the government conflates him individually and him with OTF, only the family, which Mr. Brayman went into a little bit. I'm going to distinguish the two of those for you for a second. And first, I want to talk about him individually. This attorney cannot keep a straight thought. It is so annoying reading this dude's words. He said, Your Honor, if you look at the indictment, I'll tell you that the indictment, every time we read one of these, we kind of look for that proverbial smoking gun gun. And if you look at page 2 of the indictment, page 3 of the indictment, paragraph 6, it says, following the attempted murder of TB and the murder of SR, defendant Banks sought to commercialize SR's death by rapping about his revenge on TB with music that explicitly references audio from a news clip taken shortly after SR's murder, when TB screamed "no, no" after seeing SR's dead body. And then it has the lyrics. Your Honor, can you look at the lyrics? I don't want to embarrass myself and try to do that. And so the big thing here is the proverbial smoking gun, is that this indictment takes place, and months later, Lil Durk puts out a song to celebrate it and commercialize it immediately. When we got on the case, we heard from multiple people in the music industry that read about this because it became a big news story. The press loved this, him celebrating and doing that, and everybody said, hold on a second, when you do music, you don't just record a song. It's a long process, not unlike movies, right? We're here in LA. Sometimes they'll make a movie in 2022 and it doesn't come out till 2024. It's the exact same thing with the music. Your Honor, that song was recorded approximately 8 months before that indictment took place. So this is something we went over yesterday in my video, where they're trying to say that they used false evidence to get the indictment in the first place. And they go over that for a minute. I'm not going to go over it again here because he basically just says what they said in their motion yesterday. In fact, eventually the judge tells him, man, you could continue to present this, but I think it would be helpful if you just focused your argument on the allegations that suggest the defendant presents a danger to the community. But Durk's attorney, Mr. Finling, continues to talk about this song and how it was used to get the grand jury indictment. And then finally, he says, but we have nothing presented by the government as part of this hearing that is showing any violent activity during this relevant time period by our client. I mean, I do these hearings relentlessly, and they're involving a shooting incident and a stabbing incident and a fighting incident. And other than some unknown incident that he's not charged with out of Chicago, there's no charges out of Chicago. Mr. Brayman has done a yeoman's job at trying to keep up with that. There's no apparent case in Chicago. We have nothing. The only thing that we are given is a dismissed case in Fulton County and somehow unknown persons that are cooperating, that's casting allegations at our client. Other than that, there's nothing of substance to indicate that he is the perpetrator of violent activity, and particularly because of this incident resulting in this case taking place in 2022. I mean, we're now in well excess of 2 years goes by, and there's nothing to indicate that there's anything hands-on that he's been involved in. The only thing that he's been involved in is what I'm about to now turn to, and that is, and you'll note that in one of our footnotes, an agent says something to the effect that he tries to distance himself by involving himself in community services, and that can't be anything further from the truth. From 2020 through this period of time, while there's nothing provable, substantive that the government could tender you to show that he's a threat to people, that he's violent, okay, we can do that, and we can show you exactly what Mr. Brayman was referencing, and that it is the robust community service that he's been involved in. He then goes through some community service work that Little Durk did from 2020 to 2024. Again, not talking about why he's not a threat. He apparently gave away a few backpacks, worked with medical workers, first responders. He says he's literally physically involved in extensive work with the community. That's provable. It's not hearsay. That's not coming from somebody that's trying to cut a deal and help themselves in whatever case that they have. That's provable work by business executives that have joined with him through this tremendous effort. He talks about how only the family isn't a gang, but it's a corporation. It was incorporated in 2012. He says that the COO of Sony and Alamo were in the courtroom supporting Durk, standing by his side. He said that they pledged that if he's able to put together a barrel package, they will put up $1 million in cash to support him. He explains Lil Durk's record deal with Epic Records, a bunch of shit that has nothing to do with nothing, to be honest with y'all. And that's something that the government points out. Interrupting, they say, Drew, my apologies to interrupt, but Your Honor, we stipulate that the defendant is a successful music artist. This case isn't about that. It's about his control over the label OTF and the violent crime that's the issue. They didn't have to request that he address the specific issue of danger. Mr. Finling says OTF is not a violent gang. It's a duly incorporated organization that has reached a relationship with other successful organizations like Sony, and says that he don't think Sony would do a deal with OTF if they thought they were getting in bed with a criminal organization. Says that he is a law-abiding citizen. He then spends 20 minutes talking about how OTF isn't a gang. He then talks about Lil Durk's education. He said, look at his education. It's in the report. He doesn't even have a GED. Argues that the court should be impressed because even though he doesn't have a GED, he was still able to find transactional lawyers to incorporate OTF as a label. He says, if you don't have money, then you have a problem trying to get bail. But if you have some money and you're trying to use it to create conditions that'll work, then the court should consider that. They say they already got a location picked for him. The court has the location and even says that they're trying to create 24/7 security to make sure Lil Durk does right if he's let out. He says, I want the court to know that if the court thinks that all of that in their bail package is a threshold that they don't like and they want it to go up 12 notches and it takes them a month to satisfy what the court wants, they'll still do that. He then provides a copy of every single person employed at a security company they want to hire, saying that they've all been vetted for the court. He then requests that if Lil Durk is released, he be allowed to record music and stay employed. He says they put up a combined $2.3 million worth of property in order for Durk to get out. They also made a multi-million-dollar cash commitment. And then he says that there are literally people in the business world that are here to stand behind Lil Durk that are making offers for if the court wants more money that they will put up on Lil Durk's behalf. So he said the offers are coming in. We literally put the pause button on it because we want to see if the court says, you know what, this is really good enough. Not many people can do something like this, but if the court says, given the facts and circumstances of the case, it needs X amount of dollars, then we'll take the time to reach that number. And he says, we think that this combination constitutes a sufficient bail package under this set of circumstances, and we're willing to entertain any suggestions or questions that the court might have. And then the government does add a little bit more. They say, so your honor, most of what counsel just articulated, I objected twice. I don't see it as responsive or relevant to the narrow issue before the court, whether or not conditions or combinations of conditions can reasonably assure the defendant's appearance or mitigate the danger to the community. So what essentially has been offered is Lil Durk has offered a small portion of his net worth and then sureties by other, including a corporate surety, and then a security company that's offering physical security. As the allegations of this case make abundantly clear, Lil Durk wasn't on the street pulling the trigger. He was the one who allegedly orchestrated it. Basically, he put out a hit. He gave the green light. He booked the flights. They talk about how he sent a text message where he said, don't put my name on those flights. And then they say, you know, the counsel didn't really address much of what the indictment actually alleges and instead focused on the portion that referenced rap lyrics. But we submit to your honor that the indictment is lengthy and includes allegations that show Lil Durk's significant involvement in the murder. And I mean, I have to kind of agree with her, man. Drew Findling did a terrible job combating anything that was brought up. The government says with that again, the murder was committed through intermediaries, and the physical surveillance company that counsel is offering to mitigate flight and danger really offers no mitigation to that. He could still, basically nothing about that prevents him from intimidating witnesses, instructing intermediaries, sending text messages, and so on and so forth. So the government stands by its briefing and requests that the court detain the defendant. Drew Findling makes his last little piece of an argument by saying, in regards to the text messages, we're willing to surrender any telephonic communication devices. If there was a rule regarding telephonic communication devices, we would abide by that. And then they close out and the court says this right here. All right, I have reviewed the materials that were presented. I identified at the beginning of the hearing, and I have also reviewed the materials that were submitted by the defense at the hearing, the e-ticket itinerary, and the receipt of the Neighborhood Heroes Foundation. It's like a printout from a slide deck that looks to be about 30 pages. Okay. And based on the violations that are charged, with which the defendant is charged in the first superseding indictment, there is a presumption in this case that the defendant is both a danger to the community and a risk of flight. The defense has the burden of producing or proffering evidence to rebut the presumption, and the defense has proffered a considerable amount of evidence, which the court has taken into consideration. The presumption does nonetheless remain in this case, although I will note that particularly with regard to the risk of flight, the defense has proffered considerable information. And I recognize the community service that is reflected in the documents that have been provided by the defense. The issue before this court, though, is very narrow, which is whether there are conditions or a combination of conditions that can reasonably assure the safety of the community as well as the appearance of the defendant as required. It's not an issue before this court whether the defendant is or is not a member of a gang or how his family organization is characterized. With regard to both flight risk and danger, based on all of the evidence, I do find that there is no condition or no combination of conditions that will reasonably assure, first of all, and most significantly, the safety of the community and any other person. And this is, of course, based primarily on the allegations in the first superseding indictment. And although the allegations are not that the defendant personally pulled the trigger, the allegations are that the defendant exercised a significant amount of control over other individuals and that those individuals were acting at his direction. And I agree with the government that the presence of a security company providing security for the defendant is not going to address the significant concerns with regard to the safety of the community here. The security company would be acting at the direction and under the guidance of the defendant. And so I do not find that that addresses issues regarding dangerousness. With regard to serious risk of flight, that is a closer call. I recognize the pretrial services concludes that there are conditions that can be set that would address the significant risk of flight. However, I disagree and find that there is no condition or combination of conditions that will reasonably assure the defendant's appearance as required, given the fact that the record is replete with evidence that has significant resources and ability to leave the jurisdiction. Whether it is for an entity that is U.S. government can engage in extradition proceedings with or not, he has the ability to clearly and resources to leave this jurisdiction. The bond package, although significant, would leave the defendant with considerable resources and his own actions in this case, which suggests that upon learning that the charges were imminent and might carry a maximum sentence of life in prison, induced himself to make preparations, apparently hasty preparations, to leave the country. So for all of those reasons, the government requests for detention on both bases are granted, and I will issue a written order. And that is it for that hearing. It's pretty much everything that was said and went over. Lil Durk ain't coming home. That little bond package that they proposed didn't work. Lil Durk is going to stay in jail probably until his trial starts and concludes, but we'll have to wait and see. For now, that's what I got. That's it. That's the video. That's the whole story right there about this hearing that took place, and y'all gotta let me know what y'all think about it in the comments down below. Anyways, that's basically it for the video, guys. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, tap the notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a video. As always, it's been fun rocking with y'all, man. I'm out.